Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. In this webinar, we'll talk about pre-thinking, which is a core skill when it comes to acing GMAT critical reasoning. And then we're going to look at how should you approach pre-thinking. We're going to solve about 5 questions and a few examples. When I say 5 questions, 5 full-length questions, and a few small examples with regards to pre-thinking. And then we are also going to help you figure out what do you do next as to become a skilled pre-thinker. It's a fairly application-focused webinar. Having said that, a lot has happened in the GMAT world in the past 1 week, or GMAT and MBA world in the past 1 week. So we're also going to talk a bit about that. Now, for those of you who've just started your preparation and have no idea of how to approach critical reasoning, but did send a few video lessons your way. And these video lessons were Introduction to Assumption, Pre-thinking Logical Gap, and Pre-thinking Two Entities. If you're someone who's at less than 60th percentile in GMAT critical reasoning, these video lessons you'd find them very, very helpful in helping you get to that 40th, 50th percentile level. They'll help you set a foundation, and if you've already gone through these video lessons, then you're absolutely ready for this webinar. But if you haven't, then just log into your e-GMAT account post this webinar and just go through these video lessons. You're going to find that the ROI from this webinar would go up tremendously once you go through these video lessons. With that, we also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on algebra that is tomorrow. In this webinar, similar to what we'll do in today's webinar, we're going to look at how can you answer the easiest or the most complex algebra questions if you have a unified approach towards approaching questions and absolute values, inequalities, and in general linear equations. So that's tomorrow, 24 hours from now. And then next weekend, we have a free webinar on how to build a study plan to get to your target GMAT score, whether it's 730, 740, 770, or so on and so forth. And then from there on, how do you define metrics that you should hit as you're preparing, and how do you track that improvement? So that's probably one of our most popular webinars. That's next weekend, 7 a.m. on 25th April, Saturday. With that, I have about 330 people in this webinar, and I'd like to figure out a few things about you, as to, first of all, when do you plan to take the test? And then the second one is, what is your target GMAT score? Let me remove broadcast results and get this answer in. All right. The second question is, what is your target GMAT score? You haven't responded to this one, please do so. I have about 150 responses to what is your target GMAT score. Let's get to about 210, 220 at least. And guys, in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to ask a few other questions, and I'd appreciate if I get more responses. It helps us understand the makeup of this group as a whole, and then it helps us personalize this lesson to you, or this webinar to the needs of this particular group. All right, let me end the poll. I have about 215 responses. Let me remove broadcast or add broadcast results. And what we really see is most popular group 730 to 750, second most popular segment 710, 720. And then we also have a significant number of people in that 760 plus group. With regards to people who haven't, when do people plan to take the test? Very few of you are planning to take the test in the next 15 days. The biggest group over here is those who haven't taken their data as of yet. And then we have a significant number of people in the 46 to 75 days as well. That's wonderful. With that, let me go right into the webinar pane. And as I said, I'm going to ask a few questions just to really make sure we get some good representative data from folks over here. And so I also said, we're going to ask a few questions just to really address some of the concerns, because a lot has happened in the MBA and GMAT world over the last few days or so. So we're going to talk about your concerns with regards to your MBA in about 6 minutes. Then we're going to go into the core of this webinar, which is going to be for about 2 hours after that. And then from there on, we're going to answer as many questions as possible during that webinar. But if there are still questions that are left post this webinar, I'd be happy to address them. I'm going to spare a few minutes post this webinar for the same. So yeah. So overall, this webinar, it usually is about 2 hours. Today it could end up being as much as 2 hours and 45 minutes or so. And again, we're recording this webinar, so if you have to leave, you're free to leave. Okay, with that, let's get a few more data points about this group as a whole. So how many of you plan to apply in R2 or R3 of this year? So here is the poll question over here. The question says, when do you plan to apply? And let's get some data points over here. So R3 or R4, which is within 45 days, round one, which is September of 2020, actually. It shouldn't say 2019, it should say September 2020. And round two should actually say December, January 2020. I'm sorry about the typos. I just made these poll questions. But round two is December 2020. And round one is September 2020, not 2019. All right, let's get a few more responses to this question over here. And about 210 responses out of 406 possible responses that we can get. About 400 plus students over here. All right, a few of you who can't hear, just join again. Usually when you join, the problem does sort out by itself. All right, as you can really see, good chunk of you, about 50% of you are planning to apply in September of 2020. The second biggest group is those who plan to apply in December or January of 2021, actually, if it's January, and then you have about 15% of you who are planning to apply in R3, R4. If you're an e-GMAT student, if you're planning to apply in R3, R4, then I think do write to me. I would like to see how we can help you prepare better with regards to this new format. So online GMAT, what do you plan to take the online GMAT? Let's kind of talk about this over here. Do you plan to take the online GMAT, which is the GMAT that you can take at home, just for those of you? Okay. So when you say I want to take the online GMAT, you're saying I want to take the GMAT at home. I want to make sure I clarify that. And the three options are, yes, I will take it. The second is no, I want to, but I don't think I'll perform as well. And then no, I'm applying in R1 or later. Okay, let me end the poll. As you can really see, about 37% of you, a pretty significant number of you plan to take it, plan to take the online version of the GMAT. Okay, that's pretty good. That's really good to know. Let me actually get a snip. And again, this is really good to know. I think this is useful for you as well to really say how people are thinking otherwise. And I think this is good representative data. We have about 200 odd people over here. All right, let's kind of go to the next question. What are your concerns about applying in R3, R4 versus R1? And I'm going to really put in a short answer poll over here. And you can type those concerns in. And the reason I'm asking this is because we'd like to, as a company, you know, even though we are just a GMAT prep company, we do a lot of research with regards to the pulse of business schools. We actually have a very active blog. If you go to e-GMAT blogs, you're going to find that we are the fourth most popular blog in the industry. And we are actually the only company in the world where we don't delve directly into admission consulting, but we publish so much content just because we want to help you guys get to the get to the right business school. Because if you ace the GMAT, it doesn't do you any good unless and until you get into the schools of your choice. Okay, so people have asked one question, which is, hey, R3, R4, and you know, are they really bad? And I'm going to tell you one thing. If you talk to admission consultants, they'll tell you R3, R4 are really bad. But admission consultants have a very small subset of data point. A typical admission consultant works with 50 students in a year, 50 to 60. That's kind of the statistical significance of data that they get, or rather, that's the data point, and you can really see the statistical significance. I'm sorry, post that. But how many students we at e-GMAT deal with? About 10,000 paying students, and these are not, we deal about 100,000 registered students, but 10,000 paying students every year. And I can tell you, many of our students get full fellowships in R3 and R4. So in fact, Sandeep, if you can share our YouTube video links for some folks who've gotten full fellowships in R3 and R4. And they will be able to, you can really, actually here is one that I can share right away. Is around, so yeah, so I mean R3, R4 are not bad. Having said that, definitely R1 and R2 are slightly better. That's something that I would say, because I want to make sure that that part's very clear. People say R3 and R4, or a lot of admission consultants would say, it's suicide to apply an R3 and R4. No, not according to the real data that we have from students. No, we've gotten people, we've had students who've gotten full fellowships in R3 and R4 after they were rejected in R2. Okay, now let's talk about that over here. I'm gonna actually get a few more poll questions. Online GMAT, what are your key concerns? For those of you who plan to take the online version of the test, what are your key concerns? And you can select as many choices as you want in this one. So this is a multiple response question. And with that, I'm going to take in about a larger chunk of my larger share than what I expected in this first part. All right, the topmost concerns, as you can really see, no scratch pad is the biggest concern. No break between quant and verbal is the second largest concern. Internet requirements, third. Again, very few people are in that boat where they don't have a webcam, a computer with a webcam. But surprisingly, more people are concerned that they don't have a place which is just quiet enough to actually take the test. This is good data, because I wouldn't have guessed that as the fifth option to be the one that actually would be as prevalent. Okay, that is good. Thank you. All right, with that, for those of you who do plan to take the test, I want to make sure that you guys are prepared well in the next 2 months or so to take the test. And I want to kind of really, what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to back this claim with data. And the data is, if you look at GMAT Club, you're going to find more reviews for e-GMAT, more success stories by e-GMAT students than by any other prep company. And one of the key reasons why our students are successful in the limited time that they have is because we help each one of them create their personalized study journey. And what is that personalized study journey? It starts with helping them create a personalized study plan, and then giving them metrics that actually help them prepare for the test and track their improvement as they're preparing. So if you think about the e-GMAT learning architecture, a lot of that architecture is built around what we call as an approach by a private tutor versus a traditional test prep course, which is built around what we call as a book-based approach, which is one of the other reasons why we don't like books, because we prefer working in the mode in which a private tutor works. So what's the difference in these two modes? When you think about how do you want to get to a score of 720 or higher, you want to make sure that each one of you creates a personalized path towards your goals, learns the concept that you need to learn, not all the concepts, but only the concepts that you need to learn to get there. And just knowing those concepts isn't enough. And you also need to know how to apply those concepts, and then you need to get so good at applying those concepts that you are in that top 5, top 4, or top 1 percentile of students. I mean, a 760 is 99 percentile, so you need to be in that top 1 percentile of students. So the one thing that I want to talk about is how can we help each one of you define a path towards your goal. The way to do this, the general strategy, is to make sure each one of you gets an assessment of what your starting abilities is. And how do you do that? We're going to tell you how you do that. Then each one of you creates milestones that are personalized to you, which means that are built around your strengths, that are built around your weaknesses. And then you focus on studying only those parts of the course that you need to study. That's about it. If you do that, your chances of success improve by as much as 4 times. So how do you go about figuring out what your strengths and weaknesses are, or what we call as quantifying starting abilities? You take what we call as a sigma X mark, and Manas or Sandeep, if you can share the link to sigma X mark, that's something that be there. That'd be really helpful. Then, how do you set your milestones? Once you have your strengths and weaknesses outlined, so what a sigma X mark does is something, it gives you not just your score, but it gives you analysis that is better than your ESR. It gives you starting abilities in sentence correction, critical reasoning, reading comprehension, arithmetic, and algebra and geometry. Once you have those abilities, by the way, even though the online GMAT doesn't give you that analysis, only our test as well as the real GMAT, which you take in test centers, that gives you that analysis. So once you have those starting abilities, you need to really define your target abilities, and we built an AI-driven utility that helps you get there. It's called GMAT Planner. So if you go to gmatplanner.com, you can figure out how to do that. So how does that work? It takes in your current quant and verbal score. It then, these are actually screenshots from GMAT Planner. It then tells you what should be your target quant and target verbal scores. And then it takes in those personalized abilities that we got out of sigma X mark, and it decides the target abilities for each one of you. Now this is done based using an AI driven tool, which means that these numbers are unique for each one of you based on your starting points. Okay, and then it tells you based on your starting abilities, which are on the left, which come from sigma X mark, how long should you need to study to reach your target milestones. Okay, and so each one of you gets that, and then it also tells you what should you be focusing your energy on to hit those target milestones, ensuring that you don't waste your time. Okay, it then gives you a day-by-day study plan. It takes into account how many hours you're going to put in every day. In fact, you can personalize all of this. So that's about GMAT Planner, and if you've not scheduled a session with one of our mentors, you can do that. Okay, and this is an AI-driven tool. We spent upwards of 1,000 hours creating this tool. Okay, here are some examples of people who've aced the GMAT in a short amount of time because they've had this personalized guidance over there. And again, there are many more on our YouTube channel which you can attend. Okay. Also, feel free to connect with me on my LinkedIn channel. We post about 4 articles every week or so. If you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, if you want to stay updated with all things that go on in the MBA world, that's one other thing that you can really do. Also, you can connect with upwards of 15,000 students, current students who's studying in top 3 schools. Okay. With that, I want to actually share a couple of other links as well. So here are a few web links that I want to share. So one is the link to our YouTube channel. So if you click on the link and go there, you can really see those success stories. You can see about 500 videos, and we continue to post videos every day. And then there are a few top MBA programs that don't have a GMAT requirement right now. If you want to apply an R3 and R4, you can also, we've written a blog post on that. You can also get to that over here. Okay, GMAT Planner URL. Here is the URL for you. Harsha says, should we enroll in economic crisis management course offered by Wharton only during the coronavirus lockdown days? Well, that's a very valuable course, Harsha. It's more valuable today, but I think in general that's a course that's very very valuable. So so definitely enroll in it. All right, with that, let's go right into the core of this webinar, and I want to thank you guys for putting in all of those responses. This gives us really good data. In fact, the concerns that you voiced, we're going to actually share those concerns with the GMAC right after this webinar. So yes, with that, let's move forward. So let's go into the second part of this webinar. So in this second part, here's how we're going to go about doing this. We're going to talk about pre-thinking and how do you approach assumption questions today, because our session is focused on assumptions questions only. But if you master pre-thinking, you'd be able to apply the same approach to evaluate questions, and then you'd be able to morph this approach to strengthen, weaken, as well as fill in the blank question types. And how we're going to teach you pre-thinking is we're going to do pre-thinking on two arguments, one simple, one complex. Then we're going to solve actually three full-length questions. This one says two, but we added a bonus question for today. And we're going to do those questions as quiz. And for each of these questions, we're going to apply pre-thinking. We're going to do the negation test. And then after that, we're going to really look at, hey, once you're done with this, how do you become a skilled pre-thinker? And where should you go practice more questions that have solutions that include pre-thinking in there. And we are constantly making new questions in addition to some resources that we have. We're also going to point you to that. And then from there on, hopefully you become a skilled pre-thinker overall. And if you still have doubts, do reach out to us. You can write to us at support@e-GMAT, or you can write to me personally at rajat@e-GMAT. So essentially, at a very high level, we'll document how you prepare today. Then we're going to look at what's important to ace or get to that 90th percentile in critical reasoning. And then we're going to talk about, hey, how can you go about becoming that skilled pre-thinker? All right, let's talk about your current approach to GMAT critical reasoning. And let me put in a poll question over here. And the question is, which methodology do you follow? I'm going to share two methodologies over here. And here is my poll question. I'm going to reopen this. But before I do that, I want to make sure you understand this. Please don't put in the answers before I show the methodologies. What is pre-thinking? Pre-thinking is thinking of one assumption or potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before looking at the answer choices. And I'll go right from the back. So basically, a skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in about 15 seconds. Actually, this is, and then you do pre-thinking before you look at the answer choices. The third piece, an argument can have multiple assumptions. We're not trying to figure out all the assumptions when we're doing pre-thinking. The goal of pre-thinking is to be able to figure out the logic that the author uses to arrive at his conclusion. And if we are able to think about one potential assumption, what we are proving to ourselves is that we understand that logic. In other words, pre-thinking is not the same as prediction. And I want to make sure that you guys understand this. We're not trying to predict the answer. The assumption that you may pre-think may not be there in the answer choices. The goal of pre-thinking is to make sure you understand the logic that the author uses. And that's very, very, I want to make sure that's very clear. Why? Because as a term, pre-thinking has existed in blogosphere way before e-GMAT existed, but it's also a term that's been misinterpreted, that's been abused. And we were the first company to precisely define this term in this particular manner. Again, pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer. That's not what we are trying to do. Okay. So how do you solve an assumption question? Which of the two methodologies do you follow? Methodology one is that you read the argument, look at the answer choices, and come back to the argument till you reach the final candidate. Methodology two is you read the argument, you pre-think an assumption, and you evaluate the answer choices, referring back to the argument only if needed. So which methodology do you use? All right, let's get a few more responses. I have 450 students in the webinar. I want to make sure we get at least 250 responses. All right, 5, 4, 3. I have about actually 275 responses. And the poll broadcasts the results of your 50-50 split. Half of you use methodology 1, the other half use methodology 2. That's wonderful. The second question, which is really important, is essentially, where do you spend the biggest chunk of your time if you use the pre-thinking approach? The second question is only for those people who use the pre-thinking approach. Where do you spend the biggest chunk of your time? If you don't use the pre-thinking approach, do not answer this question. All right, and I'm gonna end the poll because I have most of the responses, and I'm gonna broadcast results. And what you really see is people who use the pre-thinking approach spend the biggest chunk of their time in reading and understanding the argument. That's where you should be spending it. If you don't use the pre-thinking approach, you probably spend the biggest chunk of your time in selecting the correct answer. Why? Because you're doing back and forth with the argument. I just want to make sure different approaches lead to differences in where you spend time, and that's really important. Okay. Now let's start having fun. Okay, let's understand what an assumption is, and to do that, I'm going to really give you an argument that's very close to your heart, an argument that each one of you probably should be able to identify with, and I want to make sure that you put in your assumptions over here. Okay, here's the argument. Take about 30 to 40 seconds and tell me, what does the author assume? All right, let's get a few more responses. And again, I'm not sharing results, but if you're typing in the responses and pressing enter, I am receiving that. I have about 21 responses already. Let's get to at least 50 responses. 38, 44, 49, 53. I'm going to start sharing. So now you can see your responses. All right, that's wonderful. Okay, most of you have gotten the crux of this argument perfectly. What you're really saying is, hey, if you want to get into an Ivy League college, you need to score 500, and you're able to really figure out the jump that the author is making really well. Now, this proves one thing. One is, if you understand the argument well, now granted this is a simple argument, but if you understand the argument, pre-thinking is a very natural exercise. Okay, and which is where, the prior question, people who follow the pre-thinking approach spend the biggest chunk of time in understanding the argument. Why? Because, hey, that's what you need to do to ace pre-thinking. Once you do that, you're golden. And the second thing is, each one of you can pre-think. I have 127 answers, most of them correct. What's happening over here? The author gives you a data point, is saying there's this guy called Joe who scored 500 on the GMAT, and then based on this, he actually draws a conclusion saying, therefore, which is your conclusion marker, Joe, he refers to Joe, will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So essentially, he makes this jump from that score of 500 on the GMAT to no admission in Ivy League college. And while doing that, what he really says is, what he's assuming is, that a score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, you got most of it right, except with the exception of this. Many of you did not really get this. And the reason why this is important is because his conclusion is about Joe. The author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get into an Ivy League college. What he's saying is Joe will not get into an Ivy League college. But again, you got the crux of it, and which is really important in this case. Okay. Now with that, I want you to tell me, and I'm going to clear your poll responses over here. So if innately you can understand what an assumption is, then tell me, what's the definition of an assumption? How do you define an assumption? Type your answer in over here, please. Okay, let's have 27 responses. I'm going to broadcast results when I have closer to 50. I have about 54. Okay, some really good responses over here. Unstated idea that always must be true, not stated, should have a logical flow. Not so great a response, but unstated idea that must be true is really good. Unstated logic of the author, again, I would say it's not as precise a response. Okay, apparent meaning of a sentence, hopefully you'd say that response in sentence correction. Okay, so what is an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Now, when it comes to critical reasoning and actually many aspects of the GMAT, precise definitions are all you need to answer questions correctly. And that's why this is one definition that you need to remember. You need to be able to understand each and every word of this definition. So what does this mean when you say an unstated idea? What does this imply? If an assumption is an unstated idea, what it means is that you cannot infer the information presented in assumption from the factual information that the argument provides. Okay. The second thing is, if an assumption is must be true for the conclusion to be valid, then this means that without the assumption, the conclusion can break down. And that's really important. Now, so many of you may be thinking, hey, this is really simple. Why are we focusing on it? Because as arguments get more complex, you're going to falter. You're going to choose answer choices that do not satisfy these conditions. And when I go on to justify why a particular answer choice is incorrect, an answer choice that you've selected, I'm going to invoke this definition. I'm going to really say, remember what an assumption was. Does this satisfy that assumption, that criteria? And you're going to really see that particular answer choice does not satisfy that criteria. Now, a lot of you said an assumption is an unstated premise, an assumption is a logical gap, and so on and so forth. And that's something that a good assumption, a proper assumption satisfied. But every statement that's an unstated premise is not an assumption. Okay. For example, a strengthener is an unstated premise, which is not every strengthener is an assumption. And to really tell you metaphorically what I'm talking about, think of this entire argument to be this house where the roof is this conclusion. Now, the purpose of an argument is to make sure that the author is able to put forward his conclusion, because the conclusion always belongs to the author. Now, these three pillars are pillars that are supporting this roof, which is they're supporting this assumption, this conclusion. Not all of those pillars are necessary for the roof to stay upright. Now, so each of these three pillars are supporting statements, but only one of these pillars is necessary for the roof to stay upright, which means for the roof to not cave in. That necessary pillar, which is the pillar shaded in blue, is your assumption. All the other pillars, while they make the roof stronger, while they make the conclusion more believable, they are not must be true pillars. And they are not assumptions, they are merely strengtheners. Okay. And that's something which is really important to understand. And that's why thinking about it metaphorically is really important. Now, this may seem again very simple, but trust me, in about 20 minutes, I'll be invoking this logic again. So what does must be true mean? Must be true means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can break down, can no longer hold true, which means it can break down. All right. Or in other words, as a pillar, the assumption must be there for the conclusion to remain valid. Okay. Now, what does falsification of conclusion mean? Okay. So we're going to really look at the same argument that we talk about. And I want you to think about this, and I'm going to share the argument again and tell me, when would this argument be falsified? Under what conditions is this argument falsified? Under what conditions is this argument falsified, or under what conditions does this argument break down? Yes, as you guys are saying, if Joe gets into an Ivy League college with a score of 500, if he gets admission, then the author's conclusion is broken down. That's really good. And thank you very much. I'm going to actually move this out again so that we can focus on the presentation. So, how can conclusion be destroyed? As many of you said, if Joe gets admission with a score of 500. So then the question really is, how do you figure out whether an answer choice is correct? And so here's your argument, and this is the answer choice that we said is our assumption. And let's kind of figure out, does it pass the must be true test, or which means we are asking, is it must be true? Or in other words, we are asking the question, will Joe get admission or into an Ivy League college, or the conclusion break down if this particular statement to the left means this particular statement no longer holds true. So if, let me get in another annotation, if this statement no longer holds true, then by definition what you're also saying is that its negated version holds true. So, and which means that this statement holds true. Let me just repeat this. If the statement to the left, which is what we thought as our correct assumption, no longer holds true, which means if this statement no longer holds true, if you're saying that, then by definition what you're really saying is that this statement also holds true. Now if that is the case, what happens to our conclusion? Which means, does Joe get admission when the negated instance holds true? The answer to that is absolutely yes. If a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable, yes, then Joe does get admission. Now, how many of you are really saying, how can you really say that if a statement doesn't hold true, then by definition, we are also saying that its negated version automatically holds true? How are we saying that? How many of you feel you can type yes if you're really saying, how do you figure that out? You can type yay or nay. Need not be, it actually need to be. I'm going to really show you why that is the case. Let's kind of really figure that out. So again, if you say a statement is not true, by definition, what you're really saying is that essentially its negated version is true. Let's kind of look at some examples. Okay. Let's read this. If you say a statement is not true, then by definition, what you're also saying is that its negated version is true. Let's kind of look at this statement, and which says Harvard has the best MBA program. Okay. And if you as an individual says that this statement is not true, then by definition, are you not saying that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program that is as good or better than Harvard exists? Right? You're by definition saying that, which is kind of its negated version, by the way. Right? Let's kind of take another statement. John runs faster than David. If you say this statement is not true, then by definition you're also saying that David is just as fast as John, or David could be faster than John. Right? Or in other words, you're saying its negated version is true. Is the negation same as falsification? No, it isn't, and I'm going to talk about the difference. But understanding negation is the foundation for doing falsification, and that's really important. Okay. Now, and that's where I want to make sure that each one of you understands, if you say that a statement is not true, then by definition, its negated version becomes true. All right. And for those of you who want to understand what does negation mean, we've actually written probably the most comprehensive piece on negation that exists in literature. Which tells you how to go about negating things. Here is the link to that article. and it should come up in the Q&A pod right now. Okay. There's never more than one negated version. There can be more than one ways to negate a statement, but ultimately the negated version is always the same. What we call as the sample space of negation is always the same. Every statement has a unique sample space. Negation is actually very similar to sets theory for those of you who are more quant focused. But if you're not quant focused, don't worry. Negation is actually fairly simple. As you go and read that article, you're going to really understand that. Okay. So again, it's really important to understand must be true. Okay. If an answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of that particular answer choice. Why? Because an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. In other words, what this definition is saying is, hey, if the assumption is not true, the conclusion will become invalid. Can you really see how this statement is derived from the very definition of assumption? How this particular statement? All I'm talking about is deriving inferences right now. Okay, and this is very basic because many of you have not done the foundation files. So I'm just making sure we cover the basics, and I'm going to do that for another 5 minutes, and then we're going to go full speed. Okay, now must be true part 2 is if the answer choice is not the correct choice, which means it's not a must be true statement, then what you're going to find is that the conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated instance of that answer choice. Let's kind of see that piece over here as well. Okay, same argument. Okay, and the statement that we're going to evaluate is this particular statement, which is a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good choice. That's an answer choice that's given to you, and the test maker is asking you, hey, is this your correct assumption? And let's kind of follow the same test. This is the statement that you want to evaluate. You want to figure out, is this must be true, which means, hey, if the statement to the left, which is this statement, no longer holds true, then will the conclusion break down? So let's kind of look at, if you say this statement is no longer true, then its negated version becomes true, as we just talked about, which means the score of 500 becomes a good score. If that happens, does my conclusion break down, or does Joe get admission if the score of 500 is deemed a good score? Absolutely not. Why? Because when you think about the conclusion over here, it is not predicated on the fact of as to how you qualify that score of 500. You could replace 500 by 700, the argument will just remain the same. So if a score of 500 is deemed a good score, Joe will not suddenly get admission into an Ivy League college. His probability of getting an admission will not be higher than 0. Okay, so which is why this is an incorrect answer choice. Okay, so essentially, must be true helps you narrow down. For the correct answer choice, the conclusion does not hold true when you negate it. For the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion still holds true when you negate this particular answer choice. So that's your negation test, by the way. We're going to use that knowledge to come up with pre-thinking. Negation test and pre-thinking are not the same. Negation test is something that you apply on the answer choices. Pre-thinking is something that you apply on the argument without looking at the answer choices. But to be able to understand why pre-thinking works, you need to understand why negation works. So now you know that. Let's kind of start to pre-think. Okay, we're going to really follow this particular process. I'm going to give you an argument, then I'm going to give you 2 minutes. So this argument will have no answer choices. It's just a simple open-ended argument. You're going to put your pre-thinking in a short answer poll box over here. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to put in your assumptions. Okay, so you've got to figure out what does the author assume. We're going to record those answers in a short answer poll. Then I'm going to go about how I go and do pre-thinking, which is our process of pre-thinking. And then we're going to evaluate a few submissions over here. Okay. Now, what is it that you need to be able to do to do pre-thinking properly? There are very few skills that you need. One is you need to be able to read an argument properly. The second is that you need to be able to understand which statement is the conclusion, A, and B, what is the content of that conclusion. The third thing is pretty simply, you should be able to do what we call as the structure of an argument, or understanding the author's logic as to how he arrives at the conclusion. And then you already know, each one of you already knows what is an assumption, what is the precise definition, and the two characteristics of an assumption. Now, many of you, despite knowing all of these four, will falter, and I'm going to tell you why. Because you're used to reading fast. You don't focus on comprehension while you're reading. You constantly look at the clock and you really say, man, what is the answer, rather than focusing on, hey, what is the conclusion? What is the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion? If you double the amount of time you spend on understanding the conclusion, your probability to answer a CR question correctly is going to multiply. Okay. Ultimately, acing CR is actually fairly simple if you have a focused approach. With that, I'm going to give you your first argument, the first fun argument that we're going to have. And then, by the way, all the questions we're going to do in this webinar from now on are going to be fun questions, which means they're going to be difficult questions, or questions that seem difficult but in reality are fairly simple. If you don't have a pen and paper, get a pen and paper ready. Unlike the real GMAT, we allow you to use a pen and paper while you're learning. So get a pen and paper. I'm going to wait for another 15 seconds before I show the argument. 3, 2, and 1. Here is your first argument. Here's a short answer poll in which you can record your responses. And I'm going to mute myself. Okay, guys, last 30 seconds. Put your 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. Now I have 51 responses, and one thing that I will tell you is that if you are in this webinar, participate. And I understand, sometimes it's difficult to come up with pre-thinking. You might worry about, man, whatever I'm thinking, is that even valid? Is that crappy? That's okay. This is a low risk environment. I mean, no one's judging you over here. The reason why we have this is so that you can participate in this low risk environment, ask questions, and get good responses to those questions. And that's why we have a support team over here with us in this particular webinar. So participate. That's the best way. The only way you gain advantage is by putting a stake in the ground, even when you put the wrong stake. Why? Because ultimately, if you don't put a stake in the ground, you don't get feedback. If you don't get feedback, you don't improve. By the way, if it's the right stake, you actually get really good feedback. You get confidence with on the GMAT is really precious. Okay, so let's kind of look at how we're going to go about doing this. You can read what people have said, and a lot of you, when you've said your mentioned your pre-thinking, you've restated what I think is the main conclusion. So let's kind of look at this over here. So the way we go about pre-thinking is we first look at the argument and isolate the statement that we consider to be the conclusion. Then we create what we call as the logical structure of the argument, or we answer this question: how does the author arrive at the conclusion? And then we ask what we call as a falsification question. And once after doing step 1 and 2, we ask the falsification question. What happens is assumptions rarely jump out to us. And let's see why that happens. So when you think about an assumption, and I'm going to move this out. What is the definition of an assumption? Can you guys type that in? Something, an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay. Now, in other words, what it really means is without the assumption, the conclusion will break down. Okay. Can everyone get to this inference? If it's an unstated idea, that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. And I love how now you guys are participating. That's really nice. Can everyone get this? That without an assumption, the conclusion will break down, which means the assumption is built around those scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, right? Which means if you have to build around scenarios, you have to figure out, hey, where does the conclusion break down, and build an assumption over there. So to find an assumption, we need to figure out those scenarios where the conclusion breaks down, right? Right? To figure out where to put an assumption. Remember that assumption was that essential pillar. If you have to figure out where to put that essential pillar, you have to figure out where is my roof caving in. And then you go and put a pillar over there so that your roof doesn't cave in, right? That is all that we need to do. It's not rocket science, but it requires a methodical approach. So the question that we ask is, under what circumstances, given the factual pieces in the argument, will my conclusion break down? Okay, we ask this question, and the answer to this question tells you, hey, where do you need to put an assumption? And I'm going to demonstrate this to you. Here is the argument over here. And what I've done is I've broken this argument into 3 statements. The same argument, it's broken down into 3 statements. So the first step is, remember, we said we've got to figure out which statement is the main conclusion. Now I have a poll question that has 4 statements. Ignore the option which says statement 4, but out of statements 1, 2, and 3, tell me which statement, according to you, is the main conclusion. Which statement is the main conclusion? I want to see at least 200 responses, guys. I have so far 95 responses, 110, 125. I want to get to at least 200 responses. The question is, which statement out of these statement 1, 2, or 3 is the main conclusion. 165 responses, 179, 181, 195, 205. Perfect. Thank you very much. And that's what happens when you put in over here. You put a stake in the ground. Let me broadcast results. Only 43% of you think statement 2 is the main conclusion, which is actually the main conclusion. That's the correct answer. And the beauty of this is, if you got this right, give yourself a pat on the back that you understand this piece. If you did not get this right, you got that personalized feedback. You know where you need to work. And as I said, this is a low risk environment over here. So what is the main conclusion? A main conclusion is something that the author wants you to believe in. A main conclusion is always by the author. It's what the author wants you to take away from this argument. And what the author wants you to take away is this particular statement where the author is saying, hey, the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. That's what the author wants you to believe. Now, a lot of people think that statement 1 is the main conclusion because they see this word concludes over here. Now tell me, who has made that conclusion in statement 1? Is it the author or is it the published paper? Who's made that conclusion? It's the paper, right? It's not by the author. Statement 1 actually is a fact. Okay. Statement 1 is a factual piece of information over here. It actually sets the stage for the argument. It's not your conclusion. Okay. What is your conclusion? The author agrees with the information provided in that paper and he's trying to explain this. He says clearly the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers is because of the reward system. What he's saying is the reward system in some ways is causing that difference. And then in statement 3, what he says is, he explains why he says statement 2. He says the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay. Now, I want to ask another question over here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? And let's I want to again get 200 responses for this over here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Does it talk about tenured faculty? Does it talk about lecturers? Does it talk about both of their reward systems? Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? And this is statement 3 for those of you who didn't get the reference. 165 responses, 178, 179, 190. Let's get 10 more responses. 199, 200. Perfect. Let me broadcast results and end the poll. 71% of you got that right. It's only tenured faculty. The word greater is comparing the emphasis on reward on research versus teaching just for tenured faculty. Okay, there is nothing that you can infer about the reward system for full-time lecturers from statement number 3. So if you made a mistake on a question such as this, you really know 2 areas where you faltered. One is possibly you didn't understand which statement was the main conclusion. The second is you did not read statement number 3 clearly. Now, is it clear to you that the criteria for rewarding tenure, that statement 3 only talks about tenured faculty? There is no information about full-time lecturers that's given to you. That's very important to understand. Okay, so that's really good. Thank you very much. Now let's talk about a pre-thinking question. Okay, pre-thinking question, again, this is the general principle or general template for the pre-thinking question, and here is how the template is converted into the pre-thinking question for this particular argument. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance, given that we already know that full-time lecturers enhance student learning or student performance more than professors do? And the reward system for professors, remember how we've written this down. We've really clarified it. For professors, places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Okay. 2 things about this falsification question. One is, What we are really talking about is we are saying in what scenarios can we not blame the reward system. The second thing is we are taking the facts into account over here. Can everyone see this falsification question and understand this? It's built on this principle over here. Okay. Now let's ask this question. Okay. What are some possible falsification scenarios? Let's look at this. You can't blame the reward system if the non-tenured faculty has a similar emphasis on research, which means that both tenured and non-tenured faculty actually have an identical reward system. In that case, you can't blame the reward system for causing the difference in performance, right? If information is given to you that the non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, you can't blame it. There has to be something else, but not the reward system. Okay. The other piece is if there's information given to you that most professors, despite the reward system, don't act as per it. They don't care about it. If there's new information that's provided to you, in that case also you can't blame the reward system. Right? If professors don't act as per the reward system, then you can't blame the reward system for the difference in performance. Okay. If these are the two scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, then what are your assumptions? These scenarios don't exist, which means non-tenured faculty does not have, or non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system. And the second thing is most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Either one of these statements is a correct assumption. Now, do you really see? I mean, we didn't have to do rocket science to really get to this. Once we framed the falsification question properly, answers started jumping out to us. Can you see that? Either one of them is a good assumption. It's not about one or two. Okay, but you didn't have to really worry about thinking in a vacuum as to which one's as to what is an assumption. Both of them are correct. Yes, both of them are correct assumptions. An argument can have 5 or 6 assumptions, by the way. Both are absolutely correct. There is not one which is stronger than the other. Again, one other thing that I want to emphasize for those of you who are making that statement, there were no options in this question, guys. I just gave you a pure argument. I'm going to start giving you options now. But one thing that I want to make sure that each one of you understands over here, in any aspect of GMAT verbal, when you see the answer choices, there will be only one correct answer choice. Every other answer choice would be absolutely incorrect. I want to emphasize on that. Absolutely incorrect. Okay. You're not going to choose a correct answer choice because it's the best among the other options. You're going to choose an answer choice because it checks off all the boxes, and you're going to reject other answer choices because they are wrong for a very solid reason. Any teacher who tells you, hey, you've got to choose the best among the 5 answers, if this answer choice weren't there, another answer choice, one of the other 4 could have been correct, doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not how the GMAT is phrased. And I want to make sure you guys get this. Okay, there is only one correct answer choice. And to prove that point, we're going to solve our next question, because the next question will have some very tempting answer choices which you'd have to select, but only one of those would be correct. Every other answer choice would be absolutely incorrect. Okay, we've got it. I'm going to move through this very quickly. So I'm going to come to this part slightly later on. Let's kind of go to our next answer choice over here. Here is our next question. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to solve this question. 3 minutes. Okay. And I want to so figure out which is the correct answer. All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. What you see is, there's a significant number of people who are in every choice. I mean, the fewest, the least popular choice is choice A, which has 14 people over there. The most popular choice is choice E, which has about 86 people over there. Now, how was this question? How did you feel when you were solving this question? Okay. Tricky, good. Technical, quant related. Confusing choices. All right. Choices were tempting. Okay. And that's something which the choices were tempting. And that's this arguments or this questions here by design. Why? Because it's a very simple argument. But what it shows is even when the argument is so simple, if you don't follow a pre-thinking approach, the answer choices can still trick you. There's only one correct answer choice in there. Every other answer choice, even though it is very tempting, is incorrect. It's not a close answer choice, trust me. It's an incorrect answer choice. And if you consider it to be a close answer choice, you will not hit that 90th percentile. So don't think of it as a close answer choice. Okay, let's kind of look at this. So what's going on over here? We have to finance some roads, and the state is considering an increase in the toll, and it's considering a 50% increase in the 10 cents per mile toll overall. And there's a claim that's made by the highway commissioner. He says that as you increase the toll, the revenue on the highway will go up by at least 50%. Okay. That's something that's there. By the way, if you don't know how tolls work, then I would really recommend that, hey, you kind of read up on it, because when you go to B schools now, this is an official question. This is not an e-GMAT question, by the way. And again, don't post the answer. We're going to look at every answer choice and justify which one's correct. Okay, let's focus on what we're talking about over here. Okay, so what the claim that's made by the highway commissioner is that as we increase the toll, the revenue, overall total revenue, will go up by at least 50%. So it could go up by more than 50% as well. Now here is the argument. What's the definition of a conclusion? Once again, and remember I told you I'm going to ask this question again and again. What's the definition of an assumption? I'm sorry, not a conclusion. What is the definition of an assumption? An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, keep that in your brain as we go and evaluate the answer choices. All right, perfect. Thank you. I'm glad. I'm really encouraged to see the participation from you guys. So now, next question. How do we estimate annual revenue? How do we estimate this thing called annual revenue that's there in our conclusion? Okay, profit minus cost is not revenue. That's actually nothing. So it's trips times the toll price. Okay, miles times the price per mile. Yes, someone who says miles times the price per mile is the right way of looking at annual revenue. Annual revenue is the toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. I want you to pause for a moment and look at this statement over here. Okay, total number of miles traveled multiplied by the total toll per mile. Okay, is that clear to everyone? That's your annual revenue. If you travel 1,000,000 miles, you're paying 10 or 15 cents, depending on old or new toll. You actually pay that's the total annual revenue overall. Now, what do we know about the toll per mile? We're going to ask the same question. Under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? What we know is, or in other words, what you're asking is, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by 50%, provided that the toll per mile has been increased by 50%. So this thing over here is already up by 50%. So under what circumstances will that happen? A few of you have actually put in that answer already. Under what circumstances will that happen? You have the equation right here. If the total toll miles decreases, don't go by the answer choices. The possible scenario is if the total number of toll miles increases. Okay, that's the only possible scenario that is there. When you think about the assumption really is that this doesn't happen, which means the total number of miles driven does not decrease. Can everyone see the pre-thinking assumption over here? That's the only assumption that we care about. And that's very important. The total number of miles driven should not go down. Okay. Now, which answer choice talks about the total number of miles? Choice E, which is your correct answer. I'm going to look at why choice B and choice C are incorrect, by the way, so don't worry about it. And that's the beauty of pre-thinking. The confusion created by answer choices goes away. Okay, let's talk about choice B. Choice E talks about the total distance, which is the same as total number of miles. Let's see why choice B is incorrect. Okay, choice B says, and 30% of you chose choice B. By the way, choice B, choice C, and choice D are all three of them are good strengtheners, but neither one of them is an assumption. B, C, and D, and we're going to come back to that. Choice B talks about and says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its prior year's level. Now, the question that I have to ask myself is, if the total number of trips does decrease, does it mean that the total number of miles traveled will also decrease? No, it doesn't. What if, instead of 1,000,000 trips, now you have 900,000 trips, but each trip is much longer? Not necessarily. Hence, is this statement a must be true? Is this statement a must be true? No, it's not a must be true. It's a strengthener, but it is not an assumption. Those of you who chose choice B, do you understand where you faltered? Aren't the tolls calculated per trip? No, they are calculated per mile. For those of you who are saying tolls are calculated per trip, you're given tolls per mile, not tolls per trip. Look at this over here. Here is your argument. 10 cents per mile. 10 cents per mile. Anando, can you see this? Okay. Remember, annual revenue is toll per mile times the total number of miles. Okay, for those of you saying in India tolls are calculated per trip, tolls, are you saying if you are on a 1,000-kilometer highway in India, and if you exit after 50 kilometers, and if you exit after 500 kilometers, you pay the same toll in India? 50 versus 500 kilometers, it's the same toll. Are you sure? No, it isn't. Toll, even though I don't live in India, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, I know that doesn't happen in India. Toll is always calculated on distance. Okay, and by the way, it doesn't matter because you're given toll per mile, but okay. So the question that you have to ask is it must be true? I mean, and remember this, it's purely that definition of assumption that we're going with. And that's the beauty of asking that falsification question. The answer choices don't confuse you anymore. Okay. Now, for the same reason, average length of trip doesn't matter. Why? Why is average length of trip not must be true? Why is that not must be true? Because if the average length of trip decreases, what could increase? The number of trips can change. Yes, that is true. You guys are getting it now. Okay. And that's why choices B and C are actually what I call as sister choices. They talk about the same concept and they are wrong for the same reasons. Now tell me, in any sense of the word, given the definition of an assumption, could they be the correct answer? No, it is not must be true. And which is where don't go into that notion of close answer choices, please, because it's not going to do you any good. When you attend one of our SC webinars or our RC webinars, we're going to prove the same thing to you even over there. Okay. So, and again, I'm not saying because E is present, but independently, if you review C, you're going to find it's wrong. And I'm going to prove this to you again and again and again. Now, I'm going to talk about one thing that you guys are talking about that's going on in your brain, and tell me if this is truly going on. So, pre-thinking and timing. How many of you are worrying, hey man, this is going to take a lot longer if I'm going to solve questions like this? This seems to take a lot of time. How many of you are concerned about it? Okay, many of you are. Let's get a few more responses. Okay, I like those responses that are coming in, a few of those, maybe initially, but not with practice. Good. So here's how you're going to feel with regards to pre-thinking and timing. And trust me, if pre-thinking didn't work, we wouldn't have 10 times as many reviews as most test prep companies on GMAT prep. Not twice, but 10 times. So let's say you're this guy who's starting at this point where your time to answer questions is medium and your accuracy overall in critical reasoning is low. Again, I've done this qualitatively. Why? Because these numbers could be different for each one of you, but each one of you is going to go through this journey, by the way. Okay. As you start doing pre-thinking, here's something that's going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is your accuracy will go up because you're going to make fewer mistakes, especially the careless ones, and you're going to have a much better understanding of the argument. But your time to answer questions is also going to go up. As you can really see, we're going further on the x-axis, which is your time to answer questions. We're going higher on the accuracy, on the y-axis, which is your accuracy. And you're going to ask yourself, why the hell am I following pre-thinking? I'm already concerned about timing on the verbal part of the test. And at that point, some of you will drop out. I urge you not to do that. Have faith in the method. For those of you who continue to have faith in the method, what you're going to find is, as you continue doing pre-thinking, your accuracy continues to improve. Remember, we are going further up on the y-axis, but your time to answer questions will cut down drastically. And you're going to say, now I understand why pre-thinking works, why people say pre-thinking is magical. And as you continue to do that, you're going to find that your accuracy goes in that higher quadrant, and your time to answer question, the average time to answer question, actually goes down drastically. Okay. And some of you are really saying, I did the same. Um, and the journey from 1 to 4 is about 15 to 20 arguments. Okay. In a diligent fashion, 15 to 20 argument. So even if you have 10 days, you can do this. Here's some people who've done this, and if you go to our YouTube channel, you're actually gonna uh, 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 see many of these success stories. Uh, 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 so, but here's what a particular student says. He says, understand the passage completely. Most important, take your time. Equally important, pre-think an answer before looking at the answer choice. Okay, probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. There's a guy who scored 740. Another person who says, answer CR questions as if there is no answer choices. He should say there are no answer choices, is what he should have said. Then he says, pre-thinking is a game changer. Then he says, when it gets to 700 plus level questions, you have to do pre-thinking. The reason to do pre-thinking is to help you focus on the logic and not deviate from the key argument when trap or out of scope answer choices show up. This guy improved from 700 to 770. He did that improvement in about 15 days. His CR ability went from 30th percentile to 97th percentile. Okay. There's another guy who really says, this pre-thinking primes the mind. We are constantly on our toes while reading an RC paragraph. So pre-thinking is really useful in RC as well, or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep speculating that in which direction the passage will orient or what logical jump has the author taken. Okay. 220-point jump overall. Okay. Now we're going to solve two more questions, but for those of you, to make sure that each one of you does this, on my LinkedIn handle as well as on our YouTube channel, we will be posting assumption questions uh, over the next 1 week. So if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you haven't if you haven't subscribed to it, do that, because you'll be seeing 7 questions. Each one would come with video solutions, as well as you have the free trial. Now we're gonna solve a few answered questions over here. The way we do this, because I don't want to time you, is I want you to select this answer choice that says not answered. That way, when 80% of you choose another answer choice other than not answered, I would call time. So that way, I'm not going to time you. You as a group are going to time you. So I want at least 100 people to say not answered. That way, I know when 80 of you have chosen another answer choice that that you guys are done. All right, 80s. I have 91, 93, 99, 100 people have said not answered over here. That's great. Here is your first question. And I'm going to mute. All right, guys, a good chunk of you are done. Almost 80% of you are done. Get those answers in another 15 seconds. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. Choice D is the most popular. Choice B is the second most popular. Choice C is the third most popular. So we're going to discuss this question. We're now going to solve another question. You guys know the drill. You have to choose not answered. So I want to see at least 100 people choose not answered. I have 108. Good. Thank you. And here is your next question. Good luck, guys. Percent of you are done. Let's get those answers in. 3, 2, and 1. We have 193 responses. Can we get to 200? That'd be really nice. Excuse me. 196, 197, 4 more, or 3 more. What am I thinking? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll, broadcast the results. Option D is most popular. Option C is the next most popular. And then we have a few other options as well. Now, just for definition basis, I want to make sure that you guys understand any question that has where on an average our accuracy is as a group is less than 50% as a 700 level question. Okay, so just that's the definition of a 700 level question. Now this is not something that the GMAT gives you, but this is something that we've been able to decipher. Now, how did you feel about answering while you were answering this question? How were you? What, it was tough, okay. Not great. More confident, okay. Confused. Difficult. And while you're doing this, and let me just show you how you guys polled for this particular question. Here are the answer choices. This is how you guys polled. A, B, D were popular. D was the most popular. B was the second most popular, and choice A was the third most popular. Choice C was quite popular as well. It's pretty much every choice other than choice E was popular. Okay, so one thing that I'm going to tell you is, as we go through this and follow the pre-thinking approach, the correct answer should be apparent to you. So what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that the number of Verlanders receiving special program information did not increase significantly in this period of 94 to 96. Okay. Now, when you look at this particular conclusion, just looking at this conclusion, you're going to find two things over here. One is that it talks about what kind of programs. What kind of programs are we talking about? Special programs. And the second thing is that we're talking about the duration 94 to 96. Now, any answer choice that doesn't talk about special programs or RDS programs, as the argument also calls it, is not going to be a correct answer choice. Any answer choice that doesn't talk about this. Why? Because, hey, an assumption is tied to the conclusion at the hip. Okay. So, is that clear? You have to be worrying about special programs. You have to worry about what happened during the time period 94 to 96. That's great. Now, what happened between those two time periods? There are two things that happened between those time periods. A number of RDS equipped radios did not change a whole lot. So what are RDS equipped radios? These are radios that people have on which the program plays. So this is where you listen to the program. In the cell phone world, these are your cell phones. Okay. The second thing is, between 94 and 96, the number of RDS transmitting towers increased significantly, and they more than doubled actually. So these are your transmitting towers which transmit the programs. Okay. Now, there's a however between these two statements. What it indicates is, if statement 3 supports the conclusion, then statement 2, which goes against statement 3, should actually make the conclusion less believable. And it kind of is a logical thing. Why? Because if you have more towers, you would really think that more people would receive the special programming. And statement 1 says, hey, if you want to get the special program information, you actually need two things. You need radio stations with RDS technology, and you need radios with RDS feature. Now there's a very important keyword over here, which is only, which means that if you don't have any one of these, you cannot get that special program information. Okay. So essentially you need a mated set. You need a transmitting tower with RDS technology, as well as a radio with RDS feature to get that special program information. Is that clear? Is that clear? Okay. Now, let's kind of go about creating what we call as a logical structure. The conclusion, we've simplified the conclusion. Between 94 and 96, very few additional Verlanders received RDS programs. I'm going to call them RDS programs and not special program information. It's just easier. Between 94 and 96, two things happen. One is the number of RDS radios, which is the radios on which you receive these programs, kind of remain unchanged. The second is the number of stations increased tremendously. The context is to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios. Based on these two things, the author has arrived at the conclusion. Now, we're going to ask a pre-thinking question or a falsification question. Under what circumstances will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving RDS programming in the time frame, which is 94 to 96, given that there are very few additional radios and there are a lot more transmitting stations? So under what circumstances can we falsify the conclusion? Can you come up with certain scenarios? So let's kind of look at the scenarios. If people use the radio more, okay. All right, more people listening per radio, that is perfect. Then if the number of radios in range goes up, there are two scenarios in which this could happen that you guys have rarely mentioned, and you've rarely covered these. Possible scenarios are, one is if the additional station, which are the newer stations, they cover areas where there was no coverage earlier, okay, but where people actually had the right kind of radio. So if people had the right kind of radio but there was no coverage and we put in these new stations, now there is coverage and the number of people receiving this programming will go up. The second is if we start to put these radios in Starbucks, and so the people per radio actually goes up. I want you to pause and read this again. Can you really see if either one of these two happens, my conclusion breaks down? If either one of these two happens, my conclusion is falsified, broken down, blah, 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 blah. And you guys came up with this. I also came up with this, but you guys independently mentioned these in your responses. Now what it means is my assumptions are new stations don't increase the coverage significantly and the people per radio don't go up tremendously. They kind of remain about the same. Everyone agrees with these two assumptions? Now, another question. This is a very difficult question, but was any of what we did, was this difficult? Was it difficult? No, we kind of followed a process. We understood what the argument said. We asked the falsification question. The framing of the falsification question did not change. Okay, it's about getting the process right. If you watch any teams, and that's one of the reasons why we really say if you play sports, there's a lot of learnings that come from sports into education as well as in career. If you look at any of the great players, they're going to talk about it's about the process. And if you get the process right, results will start to fall in place. Okay, it's about the process. If you're not able to come up with such assumptions, figure out why. Where did you falter? And that's the key thing. That's where the improvement happens. Okay. So let's kind of look at the answer choices. I'm going to share the poll once again, how you guys polled. Here's how you guys polled in this. Okay. Very few of you chose choice A. Choice A is the correct answer. Many of you chose choice D. Choice D can be rejected on many counts. I'm going to really prove that to you. Choice A is actually worded in a very complex fashion. It says, few if any of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. Let's kind of look at this. Few if any is almost none of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94. Which are the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94? These are the new radio stations. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. What does it mean broadcast to people with the right kind of radios, but who were living in areas where there was no coverage area earlier, which means almost none of the news stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. Okay, or in other words, if some of you say what this answer choice is saying is, as they says, the area remains the same, the coverage remains the same, which is what we came up with in our pre-thinking. Let's kind of do the negation test to this one. Negate it if just to prove that this is the correct answer choice. The negated statement is at least some of the radio stations increase coverage. If at least some of the radio stations increase coverage, what happens to my conclusion? It breaks down. It breaks apart. Okay. I'm going to do the other answer choices, but can you really see why this is the correct one? Okay. Few is not ambiguous, and that's kind of where, when you read something, you have to internalize it. Let me just give you an example. So I have a question that says, and a couple of you said few is ambiguous. Let's kind of look at this over here. Actually, let me get in a new notes pane. And let's kind of do this. And I say, when I say few, if any, stocks went up today, what am I saying? What am I saying in other words? Am I not saying that close to zero, almost none of the stocks? Okay, they cannot be significant. And that's where, for those of you who've written who've read, which is that book, Power Score book, really say few could be quite a few things and that's ambiguous. No, you have to understand the context. You can't use a formulaic approach to critical reasoning. In fact, on Tuesday, we're going to post a question on our YouTube channel in which if you use a formulaic approach, you're going to falter. Okay. If you want to get to that 90th percentile, don't use formulas in critical reasoning. In fact, a formulaic approach in any aspect of GMAT quant or verbal was not going to work. Okay. Share the link to the YouTube question, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You're going to get, there are already about, 7 or 8 questions over there. And you subscribe to the channel, you're going to really see more and more questions come. We post about a question every day, a brand new question that we create. You're not going to find these questions anywhere else. All right, let's look at choice B. Choice B says, in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. I'm going to ask you the same question. What is my definition of a conclusion? What is my definition of the conclusion, of the main conclusion in an argument? It is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. Unstated idea that must hold true, right? Not the assumption. Sorry, the conclusion. Not the conclusion, sorry, the assumption. Man, it's even my brain's getting fried now. Okay, the assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to remain valid. All right, sorry about that. Yes, so everyone remembers an assumption, right? Now let's keep that definition in mind and let's evaluate this answer choice. What this answer choice is saying is that practically, if you live within the listening area, you had an RDS radio. When you say most, let's kind of make this more extreme and say, let's change this most to all, because the logic of that answer choice would remain the same. It says, if you lived within that listening area, you basically had an RDS radio. Now, my question for you is that required? What if in 1994, 20% of the people who lived within the listening area had an RDS radio, and the same 20% in 1996, the same 20% had an RDS radio, would the conclusion not continue to hold true? Won't 20% satisfy this criteria? It will, right? So is this word most required? Is that a must be true condition? Is that a must be true condition? No, it is not. And which is where it is irrelevant. And if you were still connected with the previous argument, the highway miles argument, if you look at choice B over there, it kind of tried to trick you in the same fashion, where it talked about the total number of trips. It's kind of the same thing that it's playing with. Okay, so which is why this answer choice is incorrect. Everyone who chose choice B, can you really see why this is incorrect? Okay, let's look at choice C. Choice C was quite popular too. Choice C says, equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease a station's listening area. Now, what kind of programming is my main conclusion about? Special programming. Very good. RDS or special programming. Okay, that's the same thing. Now, if a radio station does not have RDS technology, listen to this very carefully. If a radio station does not have RDS technology, what is the range of RDS programming that it can transmit? 0. You're right. Nothing. This is answer choice C over here. This is answer choice C. If the range without RDS technology is nothing, then equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease. Is that even relevant to the conclusion? Is that even relevant to the conclusion? No, it's not. Essentially, what it's talking about is adding that RDS technology on other programming, which is the non-special programming. It's not relevant. Why? Because without the RDS technology, the special programming range is 0. Okay, people who chose choice C. Can I state the conclusion once again? Absolutely. Here is my conclusion. Let me get it in the notes pane. Here is the argument over here. And again, I've divided it into 2 statements, but I mean, you can scroll it and you can read it together. Okay. Choice C. You can really see why that's wrong. Now, choice D, the most popular choice. Once again, what kind of programming am I concerned with? Special programming. What kind of programming does this answer choice talk about? Any programming. Any programming. It includes special and non-special both, by the way. But then my conclusion is only about any programming. Now, what does my argument tell me about people who don't own radios equipped to receive RDS? Am I concerned about these people who don't have the right kind of radios? No, I'm not concerned about them because they can't receive special programming as per the first statement in the argument. So this answer choice, even if you just, I mean, had you just understood the conclusion, you should have been able to scratch this answer choice off. Okay. Why is it wrong? We don't care about people if you don't have the right radio. We don't care about you if you don't have any programming. We don't care about any programming. We only care about special programming. It doesn't say radios, it says radio stations. Please read that. It says Sakshi, do you see this? What it's saying is, if you did not have the right radio, you could not receive any programming from an RDS equipped radio station. Do we care about you if you if you did not have if you don't have the RDS radio or in your house? Do we care about you? In my conclusion, no, we don't. You may be able to receive non-special programming. I don't care. In my conclusion, the author only cares about that special programming. Is that clear? For those of you who chose choice D. Perfect. Choice E, type of programming, very few of you chose, it doesn't matter. I'm going to share the PDF with you. Now, this question, it was a heavy question. There were lots of words in this question. But when you think about the logic of this question, I want you to kind of, before we go into Shelby will refuse, I want you to delve upon the logic. Was this difficult with regards to the logic? No. It's very similar to the highway question. If you understood the argument, if you trusted yourself, you would have figured out the correct answer. Okay. Yet, as per the stats, it was uber difficult based on what this group is. But again, as I really said, it's the participation that matters. It's the learning that matters. If you got it right, that's okay. If you didn't get it right, figure out why you faltered, at which step in the process you faltered, and then do that step better next time. Now, let's kind of look at this. I'm going to show you how you guys polled. Shelby will refuse. Here is how you polled. 35% of you chose choice D, which is the correct answer. Choice C is also very close, or very, very popular, as is choice E, which is the third most popular answer choice. But again, this is a 700 level question. I want to make sure you guys you guys chose the correct answer for the correct reason. So what happened last year? Last year, we collected a bunch of refuse and we did not recycle anything. We actually sent everything for incineration. Now I couldn't get a really good icon for a trash can, so for a truck, so I kind of assumed let's kind of get a trash can icon, and so how many trucks were sent for incineration last year? Can you count the number of trash cans over here? 10, right? That's good. Everyone can see 10. I want to make sure it appears on everyone's screen. All right, that's good. Now this year, we want to actually reduce the amount of residual ash. So this year, what we're going to do is we're going to separate for recycling some. So if we collect the same amount of refuse, and listen to me carefully, if we collect the same amount of refuse, how many trucks am I going to send for incineration this year? As per the argument, if I collect the same amount of refuse, if I sent 10 last year, how many am I going to send this year? It's going to be 5. Now I want you to 5 or less than 5 to be precise, as you guys said. Now I want you to answer this question. If the amount of total refuse that I collect is not the same, but it's 10 times as much, if the amount of total refuse that I collect is 10 times as much, then how many trucks am I going to send for incineration this year? If I collect 10x as much refuse this year, how many trucks am I going to send for incineration? Three. The question is, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks am I going to send for incineration this year? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. We have 100 responses and broadcast the results. Only 18 of you got this right. And that's where understanding the argument is so important. 53% of you said it's 50 and you guys are wrong. The answer is 5. And the answer is right in front of you. Let me explain to this. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So what are they saying? They're saying regardless of the amount of refuse we collect this year, we're only going to send half as many trucks as we did last year for incineration. Can you guys see this? Even if we collect 10 times or 100 times as much refuse, if we send 10 trucks last year, we're going to send 5 trucks or fewer. 5 trucks. Actually, it's to half of last year's number. It's not to half or fewer. And that's really important. That's why I say, if you want to learn the pre-thinking approach, actually, if you want to solve questions correctly, spend more time on reading the argument. Okay. So we've already done this over here. I'm going to share this with you. So what is my conclusion? The ash generated this year will be half of what it was last year. How? We're only going to send half as many trucks for incineration and we'll recycle the remaining. Last year, we burned all refuse and this burning generated a lot of ash. So what's my falsification question? My falsification question is, under what conditions will the ash generated, remember we are trying to falsify the conclusion here, be higher than 50% or greater than 50% if I only send half as many trucks? There's only one possible scenario, which is if the ash generated per truck is much higher, is higher than what it was last year. In that case only, I'm going to break my conclusion, which means my assumption is that the ash per truckload is similar to or lower than what it was last year. What if there are more trucks? There can't be. The author is telling you there won't be. It's given as a factual part. He says we will only send, there is the word only, half as many trucks for incineration this year. That's the factual piece. You can't doubt facts. Connor, does that help? And Ellie, does that help? Because they're telling you, says regardless of the amount of refuse that we collect, we are only going to send half the number of trucks for incineration that we did last year. If you want to see the argument, here is the argument once again. Here is the argument once again. Okay. Omeka, does that help? Enough was the keyword. Yes, enough refuse. Enough is a very important keyword. Thank you, Hitesh. Doesn't matter what happens to the remaining. It could be recycled. They could put it in landfills, but they will not burn it. That part is sure. Okay. Don't care about what happens to that. Okay, let's go to the answer choices. This year, no materials that city services would separate for recycling will be incinerated. Now, this is one of the few questions, there are about 5 questions on the entire set of official questions. This is an official question. It's not an e-GMAT question. There's about 5 questions in which an answer choice actually repeats the information from the argument. So this is a piece of information which is a must be true, but it doesn't provide any new information. You can infer this information from the argument. Because it doesn't provide any new information, this is not your correct assumption. But if you follow the must be true test over here, you're going to find that this is a must be true piece. But It's still not a correct assumption. Why? Because there is no new information over here. Costing of what does it cost to separate all of this stuff doesn't matter. That's not what we are concerned with in our conclusion. Okay. Larger proportion of recyclable materials. Do we care about the proportion of recyclable materials if we are only going to get half as many trucks? No, we don't care about this. Okay. Because we are only going to get half as many truckloads. Choice D is our correct answer. What they're saying is for every truckload, you're not going to generate more residual ash per truckload than was generated last year, which is kind of in line with our pre-thinking. If you do the negated piece, you say refuse incinerated this year will generate more ash per truckload, and if that is true, my conclusion breaks down. And the last option, total quantity of refuse, doesn't matter. Why? Because we'll only get half as many truckloads. Okay. Now, can you really see, if you understand the argument and have that clarity of what's going on, the incorrect answer choices don't sway you? Can you see that? And that's very important. How could the same type of truck produce more ash? It depends on what you put in that truck. You fill a truck with paper, it is going to produce a certain amount of ash. You fill the same truck with wood, it's going to probably produce 10 times as much ash. Okay. Yeah. You're not burning the trucks, you're burning what's in the trucks. The correct answer says the refuse incinerated this year will generate no more residual ash per truckload incinerated than did the refuse last year. So this choice explanation piece is really important. You have to really do it in your mind before deciding, before making that judgment whether that answer choice is correct. You have to really say, what is that answer choice really saying? It's comparing the amount of ash generated per truckload, and it says each truckload will generate the same or less ash, which is in line with our pre-thinking. We actually did that in our pre-thinking already. If you negate this answer choice, what it's saying is that the refuse generated per truckload will be more. So in this case, even if you send 5 truckloads, but if each truckload generates 20% more ash than did last year, then even then the total quantity of residual ash is going to be more than 50%. Okay. Is that clear for those of you who said, can you explain the correct answer once again? Okay, and again, I'm going to share the PDF with you. So then what should you do next? The first thing I want to make sure that you understand is that pre-thinking is a very structured process. It's not rocket science. It's not an art. And I want to make sure you have this takeaway. Why? Because an art is something that you cannot build. A process, a structure is something that each one of us can learn. Okay. The second thing is pre-thinking helps you cut through the clutter. When you do pre-thinking, your accuracy improves. You actually get to the answer more quickly. You are not confused. Okay. Now, as next steps, do 2 things. 1, make sure you go through these files in the pre-trial. In the free trial, I'm sorry. I want you to go through the introduction to assumption, pre-thinking logical gap, and pre-thinking 2 entities. These files have at least 15 arguments. Actually, it's about 25 when you look at the exercises over here. Each one of these files gives you a score. Then do assumption practice 1. The second thing that I want you to do is, if you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, join the YouTube channel. Okay. if you've not done that. Make sure that you do that. And here is how you can join the YouTube channel, because we'll be posting more questions over there. Where can you find the CR module? Just log into your e-GMAT account. If you're a free trial user, you're going to go in the free trial where you're going to see the CR concepts. If you are a paid student, make sure you go through the CR course in a proper structure. Go through the premise and conclusion files, then go through the inference module. And in each module, you're going to find multiple concept files. Each concept file is designed to give you personalized feedback. So you learn the concepts, the concept file evaluates you, you get personalized feedback. Each concept file has a set of quizzes with pre-thinking built in for each question type. Someone was asked earlier, is pre-thinking limited only to assumption, or can you also apply it to evaluate another types of CR question? We apply pre-thinking to every CR question. Okay, and then once you go through the concept file, you go through application files in which we tell you how to apply this in the structured process. The entire CR course, you go through about 20 application files. Each application file also evaluates you. You also go through the practice quizzes post application file. So you can really just make sure you get it there right then and there. Throughout the entire CR course, this is just the learning part of the CR course, not the practice part of it. You get 90 personalized feedback points, 90. Okay. When you go through the practice part as well, you get access to more than 500 full-length practice questions. And we're constantly adding to these questions right now. And this is very different from a book-based learning. Why? Because this is what we call as an integrated learning environment, where you learn a few concepts, you learn how to apply those concepts, we evaluate you on those concepts over there. Okay. Guys, please don't put questions in the Q&A pod, because others can't respond to those questions. So please don't do that. Put the questions in the Q&A pod. And this integration over here, when you learn concepts and learn how to apply those concepts, and the personalized feedback that you get at the concept level, at the application level, ensures that each one of you, if you get high scores, gets that assurance that you've learned the application well. Which is why we give feedback at every level, whether it's here, or the qualifying exercises right next to it. If you're a paid student, this is just the assumption module over here. Okay. What you really see is a few things. One is it's super comprehensive. Each one of these files, it's a video lesson, it's about 30 minutes. Okay. So this is an unattempted module. That's why you see 00 over here. Each one of them actually has built-in personalized feedback. So when you attempt it, you're going to see scores coming over here. Okay. Then the third thing that you really see is all kind of arguments are covered. This is logical gap kind of arguments. This one is arguments that compare two entities. Argument that talks about various segments. Argument that are quant-based arguments. So essentially, you learn pre-thinking in every kind of argument. Then you learn how to apply the same thing. By the way, most of you actually will have learned how to apply by the time you reach 3.4 over here. And then you get a bunch of practice questions as well. So we call this building concepts, level 1 application, level 2 application, and then practice. Just for assumptions. This is not evaluate, not strengthen, not weaken. They're all not fill in the blanks, not inference. Everything is built in this format. So you get personalized feedback at every level. So how do you get those 100+ point improvements? You actually just focus on pre-thinking. When you're learning the process, don't time yourself and do the official questions as prescribed. Make sure you achieve greater than 80% in every concept and application quiz. If you don't, go back, revise the relevant portion right then and there. Also look at the solutions. Some of you were asking, how many assumptions do I need to pre-think? When you're learning, in the test, you only need to pre-think about just one assumption. But if you are learning, spend more time, pre-think more assumptions. You're trying to build your mental capacity. Is this module on the e-GMAT website? It is, yes. Yes, if you are a paid student, you can really see that. Every module, everything that we show over here is on the e-GMAT website. Just to tell you how comprehensive this is, in the e-GMAT 3R course, you have 524 full-length questions, and you can really see how much more comprehensive it is compared to the other two popular resources that you see over here. Here's how you go through everything else. One of the other things that I want to say is, if you're going to use e-GMAT, don't practice anywhere else. Don't use any book. You do not need it. It's going to do you more harm than good. Here's an example of a student who went from a V32 to a V46 in about 20 days or so. V46 is better than 99 percentile, by the way. Again, the focus, she did the basics right. Methodical approach, making sure she doesn't repeat those mistakes. She actually just graduated from ISB. She's actually admitted to ISB within 10 days of applying. So this is one of it's actually a record with regards to the turnaround piece over there. So overall, that's all that you need. Go start with a free trial, join the YouTube channel. If the free trial is something that you find useful, consider the paid course. Here's the session handout that you can download over here. Actually, I'm gonna upload an updated version of this session handout. So you guys can do that. Let me just remove this one. So you have this. Do you get personalized feedback? Yes. If you're stuck somewhere, the system gives you personalized feedback. If you want to figure out whether you're doing something right or not, you can write to us at rajat@e-gmat.com. And Sandeep, you can put in the email address, please. How long can CR prep take on an average? There's a question. I'm actually thinking about how to respond to this, and I'll tell you. I have two daughters. One's 6 years old. The other one is 13. Okay. My older daughter, I taught her how to ride a bike. I'm teaching my younger daughter how to ride a bike. And it's the 10th day of my teaching her how to ride a bike. And she's 90% done with that. My older daughter, she's learned how to ride a bike in about 3 days. Now the difference is I taught my older daughter how to ride a bike when she was 10, which means her body was stronger. She already knew the basics. She only needed 3 days worth of coaching. A younger one, I had to make sure that I build the strength while she was learning how to bike. I also did other exercises with her. I made her do other exercises. So how long you need to improve critical reasoning would depend on what your starting point is. If you're someone who needs the very basics, you probably need about 50 to 60 hours of effort to improve critical reasoning. On the other hand, if you're already at 60th percentile, which is like my older daughter, you'd probably need about 6 days or about 30 hours. And that's kind of the personalized thing over here. For those of you who've joined using a cell phone or a tablet, you probably won't be able to download it. Cell phone browsers don't allow you to download files. So yeah. So I'm going to send the recording in the PDF. Also, this recording will be on our YouTube channel, and you'd be able to download the PDF from there as well. Actually, you know what? I think I can get you the updated PDF right away. Just give me 1 second. I should have an updated, I should have a PDF over here. Let's see if I can find an updated PDF over here. Probably not. What if pre-thinking doesn't match the options? That's a great question, and it will happen. Now, as I said earlier, the goal of pre-thinking is not to predict the answer, it's to understand the logic that the author uses. If you can come up with one successful assumption, and if the answer choices have another assumption, the moment you read it, because you've already figured that logic out, you will be able to get to the correct answer right away. How long how much should you take how long should you take to answer a CR question with a pre-thinking approach? If you are a skilled pre-thinker, the average time to answer a CR question would be between a minute 40 to a minute to about 2 minutes. Now, on certain boldface questions, boldface by definition are take longer. You'd probably need about 2 minutes 40, but there are other questions on which you'd probably need a minute 10. So your average time on the CR section would be between a minute 40 and 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 this thing, and in about 2 minutes or so. Shamoon says there are some videos available in the free trial. I wanted to figure out if there'll be more videos in the and tests in the paid version. Yeah, so we only give about 5% of the paid content in the free trial. So you can assume there'll be about 20x more content, Shamoon. And by the way, in the free trial, you don't see the practice. What you see is what we call as the learning content, not the practice content. So does that help answer your question? I'll send the PDF in an email in about in 9 hours from now. It takes me about 9 hours to process the recording and upload it, and then you guys will get an email at 6:30 a.m. IST or 6 p.m. Pacific time. Shikha says, I don't feel very comfortable with the online whiteboard. How should I proceed with GMAT online? Shikha, if you do need to take the GMAT now, so our recommendation is, if you don't need to take the GMAT, if you're not applying to R3, R4, then don't take the GMAT from home. Okay, we are petitioning to the GMAT to really allow for actually a paper-based whiteboard the same way as online GRE does. Let's see what happens, because the online whiteboard is horrible. Okay, no one can do it. I can't use that online whiteboard, especially because you can't use a touch screen, and as you go to the whiteboard, you don't see the questions, and it's just horrible. So there are two options. If you don't have to apply an R3, R4, then don't take the GMAT. If you have to apply an R3, R4, if you are one of those unfortunate people who has to do it, then we've compiled a list of schools for you that don't require a GMAT for now, and please use that list over here and apply to those schools. Okay, we want to help you make the right choice. The normal GMAT actually has an erasable whiteboard. In fact, we make such a whiteboard for fun inside our house. Essentially, what you could really do is, if you have a simple game board, you can cover it with thick plastic paper, apply tape, and use it with marker pens. That's the kind of whiteboard you're going to really see. Okay, guys, while you're doing this, if you can give me feedback in this on the right hand side, in the short answer pane in which you've been putting your responses as to how this webinar is, that'd be really great. If you can get some feedback over here, that'd be very, very helpful. And again, we have the algebra session tomorrow. You're going to find it's very, very similar to this. For those of you who think you are really strong in algebra, you will be challenged. For those of you who think you're not strong in algebra, we will tell you how you can be strong. So here is the registrations for, let me just hide this over here. Here's the registration for the algebra webinar as well as for the strategy webinar. Also, one of the other things that we've done is we have on our YouTube channel, we are now talking to people who've been admitted to top B schools, for many of them former EG matters, and we talk about how did they position their candidacy. We did one for a Stanford student whose interviews there, as well as a Rice University student who had multiple scholarships. Now, next Monday, on our YouTube channel, we will have Vishesh, who's the current student at GSB Chicago, and he's going to talk about how he's positioned his candidacy at Yale and GSB Chicago, and then how did he decide between Yale and GSB Chicago. Acing the GMAT is one thing. Positioning your candidacy at top B schools is a completely different thing. And what we found is many a times you hear from admission consultants, but you never and they talk about generic principles. We wanted to be more specific. We wanted to really say, hey, how is it that someone from a background X is able to prove to a B school that, hey, I'm gonna come from I'm a coder, but I want to become a product manager and I have it in me to become a product manager. And interviews such as these tell those stories. How is it that they were able to convince the AdCom? What did they say during the interview? How did they prepare for it? What kind of brainstorming did they do, and so on and so forth? Okay, so register for these. Uh, there's something that's going to happen as you prepare for the GMAT. You're going to find there are times when you're demotivated, and as you watch these webinars, because these are career transformation, these are life transformation journeys. You're going to find during those times having access to such things becomes is one of the most motivating things that can happen to you. Okay. So the name of the guy is Vishesh, by the way. It's over here. So if not registered for this one, do register for this one over here. And these are the other webinars. We have one tomorrow, the algebra one tomorrow, and then one next Saturday. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. It was wonderful having you guys over here. We'll continue to do more webinars every weekend and as well as during the weekdays. Now, with that, thank you and have a good day or a good evening, if depending on which part of the world you are in.